The night Claire Montgomery signed her divorce papers, she was wearing a dress she bought on clearance. Her husband had handed her the papers on their 8th wedding anniversary. He said she was a good woman. He said she was just not the right woman. He said he needed someone who matched where he was going. Then he walked out the door to meet his new girlfriend, a senator's daughter, and left Claire sitting alone at a table with cold pot roast, burned-down candles, and $47,000 in a joint savings account he thought was everything she had.
Confirms the acquisition.
He was wrong.
As of today,
Because while
the new
Derek Holt was
organizational
celebrating
chart is
his
in effect.
upgrade, while he was shaking hands with senators and posting champagne photos and congratulating himself on finally arriving at the life he deserved, his ex-wife was quietly, methodically, and with considerable precision buying every piece of real estate that stood between his new world and total collapse. He had spent 8 years married to a woman worth $4.2 billion. He had never once thought to ask. And by the time he figured it out, by the time the property records and the Forbes profiles and the Shell Company filings all pointed back to the woman he had handed a used Honda and called the wrong choice, it was already too late to stop what was coming. This is a story about what happens when the woman everyone underestimated decides she is done being invisible. Stay with me until the end, because the part that will change how you see yourself is not the revenge. It is what she chose to build afterward. Lesson line. Sometimes the greatest power you possess is the one you have been quietly hiding to make someone else comfortable. The moment you stop hiding, it is the moment everything changes. Meaning and value to the audience. This story is for every woman who has ever made herself smaller to keep the peace. Every person who has loved someone fully and been told it was not enough. Every human being who has sat in a parking lot or a quiet kitchen or a corridor at a party, wondering if the life they settled for was the only one available to them. Claire's story is not just about a billionaire reclaiming her fortune. It is about reclaiming yourself, your voice, your worth, your right to take up space without apologizing for it. It is proof that being underestimated is not the end of the story. It is very often the beginning of the best one. If this story moved you, if any part of Claire's journey felt familiar or gave you something you needed to hear today, do something simple for me right now. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second and it tells me that this kind of story matters to you. Drop a comment below with the one word that describes how this story made you feel. I read every single one, and your words genuinely shape what I create next. Share this with one person in your life who needs to hear it today. You know who that person is, and if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because the stories I bring you every week are exactly this: real emotion, real stakes, and real lessons wrapped inside narratives that will stay with you long after the final word. You found this channel for a reason. Stay.
The night my husband handed me divorce papers, I was wearing the dress he said made me look plain. I had bought it on clearance from a department store in Portland because Derek said we needed to watch our spending that month. I had ironed it carefully that evening, pinned my hair back the way he preferred, and spent 3 hours cooking his favorite meal: pot roast with rosemary, apple pie from scratch. The good coffee he liked from the small roaster on 5th Avenue. I had done everything right, and none of it mattered. He walked in 2 hours late, set his briefcase on the counter. With that careful, controlled movement he used when he had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to announce it. He smelled like someone else's perfume. He did not apologize for being late. He did not notice the candles burning down to stubs on the dining table, or the pie cooling on the rack, or the way I had arranged the good plates. The wedding china we never used, because it was our 8th anniversary and I had wanted it to feel like something. He pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase and set it on the table between us. "I want a divorce, Claire," he said. "I need someone who matches where I'm going." I stared at the envelope. The candles flickered. "Is there someone else?" I asked. He did not deny it. Her name was Vanessa Hartwell. Her father was Senator Harrison Hartwell, one of the most powerful men in Washington state. Derek had been seeing her for 7 months. 7 months. While I had been clipping grocery coupons and ironing clearance dresses and making pot roast, he had been building a different future entirely. "You're a good woman, Claire," he said, already reaching for his phone, already mentally somewhere else. "Yushar, you're just not the right woman. There's a difference." I said nothing, and the strangest thing happened. I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not throw the pot roast at his head, though I considered it briefly and with some enthusiasm. Instead, something very quiet settled into my chest, something that felt almost like the end of a long performance I had grown exhausted playing. Derek looked at me, waiting for tears or anger or desperate negotiation. When none came, he seemed vaguely unsettled. "I'll sleep at a hotel tonight," he said. "I'd appreciate it if you'd review the papers before the week is out." He picked up his briefcase. He walked to the door. And just before he left, our cat, Colonel Biscuit, a large, opinionated tabby, with strong feelings about Derek, jumped directly onto the expensive briefcase Derek had left by the door, knocking his travel coffee mug onto his shirt. Derek looked down at the spreading stain. I looked at Colonel Biscuit. Colonel Biscuit looked at me with the calm satisfaction of an animal who has done exactly what he intended. "Sorry," I said. I was not sorry. After Derek's car pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the street, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. The pot roast went cold. The candles burned out one by one. Colonel Biscuit climbed into my lap and stayed there, steady and warm, while I stared at the divorce papers and felt the shape of a decision forming in my mind. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to a contact I had not called in 8 years. The name on the screen read, Montgomery Capital, main office. I pressed call. The phone rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered. "Montgomery Capital, how may I direct your call?" "Tell Margaret Colland," I said quietly, "that Claire Montgomery is coming home." The drive to Seattle took 3 hours on a clear morning. I made it in 2.5, with Colonel Biscuit in his carrier on the passenger seat, periodically expressing his opinions about highway travel. I had packed 2 suitcases. I had left the wedding china, the furniture Derek had picked out, the framed prints on the walls that I had never particularly liked but had hung anyway because they matched his aesthetic. I took my mother's pearl earrings, my father's old copy of Hemingway, with the notes in the margins, and every piece of art I had been oddly, inexplicably protective of for 8 years. Derek had never asked why I cared so much about the art. He had never asked about a lot of things. That was the truth about our marriage. The truth I had been folding and tucking away in small, manageable pieces for years. Derek was not a cruel man. He was not a monster. He was simply a man who had decided, somewhere around year 3, that he had married beneath his ambition, and who had spent the remaining years either ignoring that feeling or finding someone else who validated it. He had never asked where I grew up, beyond the surface details. Never pressed when I deflected questions about my family. Never noticed that I paid cash for certain things, or that I received quarterly statements from a financial address in Seattle, that I always retrieved from the mailbox before he got home, or that the art on our walls, the pieces he called random stuff you dragged in from estate sales, had been appraised, collectively, at just under $2 million. He had looked at me and seen exactly what I had wanted him to see: a regular woman, an ordinary wife. The problem was that I had wanted to be seen as more than that. I had simply been waiting for him to look. He never did. My father, Robert Montgomery, had built Montgomery Capital from a single hardware distribution company in Spokane into a $4.2 billion private equity firm over the course of 30 years. He was the kind of man who remembered everyone's name, who sent handwritten notes after every meeting, who genuinely believed that business was just people helping people build things, and who happened to be extraordinarily good at identifying which things were worth building. He died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in October when I was 24 years old. No warning, no goodbye. He was there, and then he was not, and the world rearranged itself around his absence in ways I was not remotely prepared for. At 24, I was suddenly the sole heir to one of the largest private fortunes in the Pacific Northwest. I was also a grieving daughter who had no idea who she was without her father's steady presence in the room. The weight of it was suffocating. I did something that anyone with reasonable financial advisors would have called inadvisable. I called Margaret Collins, my father's COO, and the woman who had effectively run Montgomery Capital through his final years, and I said, "Maggie, I need you to run the company for a while. I need to disappear." Maggie, to her eternal credit, said, "How long is a while?" "A year," I said. "Maybe 2. I need to find out who I am when nobody knows my name." "I ran a background check on that decision," Maggie said, "and I have concerns. But go. I'll keep the lights on." I changed my last name to Carter, my mother's maiden name. I moved to Portland. I enrolled in a graduate program in urban planning, and 6 months later, I met a charming, ambitious, genuinely funny man named Derek Holt in a bookstore on a rainy Thursday afternoon, and I thought, here it is. The real thing. The thing that has nothing to do with money or legacy or expectation. 1 year became 2. 2 became 8. And now I was driving back to Seattle in a car I had paid cash for with a cat who despised highway travel. Going home to a life I had left behind because a man had handed me divorce papers and called me the wrong woman. The Montgomery Capital headquarters occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle with views of Elliott Bay. I had not been inside the building since my father's funeral. The lobby security guard looked up when I pushed through the revolving door. He glanced at me, then at Colonel Biscuit's carrier. "Ma'am, I'm afraid pets aren't—" "He's a service animal," I said. Colonel Biscuit made a sound that suggested he found this description flattering. "He doesn't have a vest. He's working on his certification. Is Margaret Collins available?" The security guard picked up his phone, made a call, and went very still for a moment. Then he set the phone down carefully and said, "Of course, Miss Montgomery. Please go right up. Both of you." The elevator opened onto the executive floor, and standing in the corridor with her arms crossed and an expression that contained equal parts exasperation and relief was Margaret Collins. She was 58 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and had managed my father's empire through 3 recessions, 2 market crashes, and 1 catastrophic printer malfunction that she still brought up at board meetings as an example of crisis management. She looked at me for a long moment. "You look terrible," she said. "Hello, Maggie. Your father hired from bookstores once, a graphic designer. The man put clip art in an annual report. I told Robert it was a bad idea." She turned and walked back toward the main office. "Come on. I made coffee. Not the office coffee. The real coffee. I assumed you'd need it." I followed her. For the first time in 3 days, something in my chest loosened. "I ran a background check on Derek Holt 8 years ago," Maggie said as she poured. "Did I tell you that? You did not. You told me not to." "I remember. I did it anyway." She handed me a mug. His credit score was a concern. I have feelings about that decision, specifically about my failure to communicate the results more forcefully. "What were the results?" He had $43,000 in law school debt, a history of overextending his lifestyle budget, and a tendency to list professional connections he did not actually have. Maggie sat across from me. In other words, he was a man who needed someone to believe in him more than the evidence warranted. She looked at me steadily. You are very good at believing in people, Claire. Your father was the same way. It was his best quality and his most expensive habit. I wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. He's marrying a senator's daughter, I said. I know. He called me the wrong woman. I know that too. Maggie was quiet for a moment. Are you ready to remember who the right woman actually is? I thought about the drive up. The clearance dress, the 8 years of making myself smaller, quieter, less. Not because Derek had demanded it explicitly, but because I had learned, slowly, and then all at once, that he needed to be the largest thing in any room we occupied together. I had been so careful to give him that space. I set down the coffee mug. Get me Thomas Ellison, I said, and get me the current property portfolio around Hartwell's downtown development, all of it. Maggie's expression shifted into something that looked almost like satisfaction. Now that, she said, picking up her phone, sounds like your father. Thomas Ellison was 65 years old, had been my father's personal attorney for 22 years, and approached every legal situation with the energy of a man who found the law personally amusing. He arrived at Montgomery Capitol the following morning with a leather briefcase, reading glasses perched on his head, and Derek's settlement offer printed on 3 pages of crisp, legal paper. He sat across from me. He read the settlement aloud. Then he set the papers down and looked at me over his glasses. He's giving you the Honda, Thomas said. I'm aware. The 2019 Honda Civic, with 41,000 miles on it. Thomas? He's also offering you the joint savings account. $47,000. And, I quote, the furniture of your choosing from the shared residence, excluding the television and the sectional sofa. Thomas paused. He's keeping the sectional sofa. I know. Claire, he's offering you a used Honda and a portion of the furniture in exchange for walking away from 8 years of marriage. I know what he's offering. He believes you have no other resources. Yes. Thomas looked at me for a long moment. Then very slowly, he smiled. It was the smile of a man who had spent 4 decades watching people underestimate the wrong person. What would you like me to do? He asked. Nothing yet. Sign nothing. Respond with standard acknowledgement that I've received the offer and am reviewing it. Make it sound like I'm struggling with the decision. And in the meantime? In the meantime, I said, we buy property. Maggie had already identified 6 parcels of commercial and mixed-use real estate within a 2-mile radius of Senator Harrison Hartwell's flagship downtown development project. The Riverside Commons, a $200 million mixed-use complex that was the centerpiece of the senator's investment portfolio and, not coincidentally, the project that Hartwell and Associates had brought Derek on to help structure. The 6 parcels were not glamorous. 2 were older commercial buildings with modest retail on the ground floor. 1 was a surface parking lot. 1 was a narrow strip of land between 2 larger buildings that had sat empty for years, but together they controlled every utility easement, every pedestrian access corridor, and every sightline that made Riverside Commons viable as a development. Without them, the senator's project was a beautifully designed building with no practical way in or out. The acquisitions will cost approximately $63 million, Maggie said, standing at the whiteboard where she had drawn a map of the surrounding blocks in blue marker. We can structure them through shell companies to avoid alerting Hartwell's team. What should we call the shell company? Thomas asked. Maggie wrote on the whiteboard, Biscuit Holdings LLC. Thomas stared at it. That's the name, he said. The cat has better business instincts than most of the people I've worked with, Maggie said. I stand by it. I looked at Colonel Biscuit, who had installed himself on the corner of the conference table and was grooming his left ear with focused attention. Biscuit Holdings? I confirmed. File it today. The acquisitions moved quietly over the following 3 weeks. Maggie managed every transaction through layers of corporate structure that would have taken a sophisticated legal team months to untangle. Real estate attorneys in 3 different cities handled the closings. No single transaction was large enough to attract attention. Meanwhile, Derek's life moved in the opposite direction, upward, visibly, with the particular enthusiasm of a man who believes he has finally arrived somewhere he deserves. He and Vanessa went public on Instagram. She posted a photo from what appeared to be a rooftop restaurant, her hand resting on Derek's arm, captioned, "Upgrading in every way." 847 comments. I looked at it once, took a screenshot, and put my phone face down on my desk. Derek called me the following Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my father's old office, watching the sun go down over Elliott Bay, reviewing Biscuit Holdings' acquisition documents. "I hope you're doing okay," Derek said. His voice had that careful warmth people use when they want credit for being considerate without actually being considerate. "I genuinely want the best for you, Claire. I hope you know that." "I know you do," I said. "I'll be fine, Derek." "Have you had a chance to review the settlement?" Thomas is looking at it. Right. A pause. "I just want this to be clean. I don't want it to get complicated." "It won't get complicated," I said. "I promise." After I hung up, Maggie appeared in the doorway. "Acquisitions on parcels 3 and 4 closed this afternoon," she said. "We own 4 of the 6. The remaining 2 close next week." "Good." "Also, she hesitated, which was unusual for Maggie, who did not typically hesitate about anything. "I need to show you something." She set a printed news alert on my desk. Derek's name. A press announcement from Hartwell and Associates. Junior partnership, effective immediately. Quote from Senator Hartwell. "A young man of exceptional promise." I read it twice. "The charity gala for Seattle Children's Hospital is in 10 days, Maggie said carefully. "The Hartwells always attend. It would be your first public appearance as Claire Montgomery." I looked at the press release. I thought about Derek in a new suit, shaking hands with senators, finally inhabiting the version of himself he had always been auditioning for. "Book me a table," I said. Maggie wrote on the whiteboard, "Operation Honda. Status, active." Then, below it, she wrote, "Gala Recon, 10 days. "That second item isn't really a military operation," Thomas said from the doorway, where he had apparently been listening. "Everything is a military operation if you approach it correctly," Maggie said. "Would you like coffee?" The Seattle Children's Hospital annual gala was held at the Four Seasons Ballroom, and it was exactly the kind of event that Derek had always wanted to attend, and I had always quietly funded, anonymously, from a donor-advised account he never knew existed. I arrived in a black dress, not the clearance one, a different one, the kind that required no explanation, and my mother's pearl earrings, and the very specific posture of a woman who has decided to stop apologizing for taking up space. The reaction was immediate. I had been out of Seattle's social and business circles for 8 years, but my father's name still carried weight in this city the way a certain kind of history always does. Heads turned, conversations paused. A woman I vaguely recognized from a board meeting a decade ago touched her companion's arm and nodded in my direction. I smiled, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, and moved through the room. I found Maggie near the entrance to the main ballroom. She was wearing a navy blazer and the expression she reserved for situations requiring maximum tactical focus. "They're here," she said without preamble. "Derek, Vanessa, and the senator. Far side of the room, near the bar. The senator is holding court with 3 city council members and what appears to be a very patient lobbyist." "Has Derek seen me?" "Not yet. He will in approximately 4 minutes if you move in that direction." I moved in that direction. I was 20 feet away when Vanessa Hartwell spotted me first. She was everything the Instagram photos suggested. Tall, blonde, draped in diamonds that caught every light in the room, with the particular confidence of a woman who had grown up understanding that rooms were arranged for her comfort. She said something to Derek. He turned. The color left his face with impressive speed. I watched him process it. The dress, the pearls, the posture, the fact that I was standing in the middle of one of Seattle's most prestigious charity events, looking like I belonged there, in a way I had never looked in 8 years of their marriage. I gave him a small nod, polite, unbothered. Then Vanessa stepped forward. "You must be Derek's ex," she said, with the kind of smile that is shaped like warmth and contains none of it. "He's mentioned you. It's so brave of you to come out." I looked at her for a moment. "It's brave of you to wear that dress," I said pleasantly. Before she could respond, Senator Harrison Hartwell appeared at his daughter's side, a large, silver-haired man who carried decades of political favor like a physical weight. He put a hand on Derek's shoulder, turned to address the small gathering that had formed, and announced, loudly enough for half the room to hear, that Derek Holt was the newest junior partner at Hartwell and Associates, a young man of exceptional promise going to exceptional places. The applause was genuine. Derek straightened. The color came back to his face. He looked exactly like the person he had always wanted to become. And something hit me then, in the stomach, sharp and specific. Not jealousy, not longing. Something more complicated than either. The particular grief of watching someone thrive after they have broken you, the involuntary recognition that they are not suffering the way you believed they should be, that the story of consequence you have been writing in your head does not match the story happening in the room. I excused myself quietly. I found a corridor off the main ballroom, a long hallway with tall windows looking out over the city lights. I stood there for a moment, my champagne glass in one hand, and let myself feel it. Just for a moment, without performing anything for anyone. My phone buzzed. "Maggie," I answered. "He looked happy," I said. My voice was steady, mostly. "He looked genuinely happy, Maggie." "Good," Maggie said, without missing a beat. "Happy people get comfortable. Comfortable people get sloppy. Are you ready to go back in there?" I looked out at the city. Somewhere below, in the financial district, 6 parcels of commercial real estate now belong to Biscuit Holdings, LLC. "Give me 2 minutes," I said. 90 seconds. The salmon is getting cold. I laughed. Actually laughed, briefly and unexpectedly, in the empty corridor. And here's the thing I have thought about many times since that night, standing in that hallway with the city below me and Maggie's voice in my ear. The moment that saves you is almost never the dramatic one. It is almost always the small one. The friend who says exactly the right absurd thing. The 90 seconds that remind you that you are still someone who laughs. I went back in. The evening continued. Senator Hartwell made his rounds. Vanessa stayed close to Derek like a woman protecting an investment. I spoke to several people I remembered from my father's world, accepted congratulations on my return that I deflected gracefully, and watched from a careful distance as Derek moved through the room he had always wanted. I did not approach him again that evening. There was no need. Operation Honda was 4 parcels of real estate into completion. The senator's development project had 12 weeks before his first major creditor review, and Derek Holt had no idea that the woman he had handed a Honda to was quietly rearranging the furniture of his new world. I finished my champagne, said goodnight to Maggie, and went home to feed Colonel Biscuit. 3 weeks after the gala, Derek Holt was sitting at his desk at Hartwell and Associates doing due diligence on a commercial real estate acquisition when he ran a routine ownership search on a neighboring parcel. The search returned a company name, Biscuit Holdings, LLC. Derek stared at it. He ran a parent company search. Biscuit Holdings, LLC was wholly owned by a holding company called MCG Northwest Partners, which was in turn owned by a trust called the Montgomery Family Trust, which was administered by Montgomery Capital, a private equity firm headquartered in Seattle, Washington. Derek typed Montgomery Capital into the search bar. The first result was a Forbes profile from 3 years ago. The headline read, "Claire Montgomery, 31, the quiet billionaire, managing her late father's $4.2 billion legacy." There was a photograph. It was his wife, his almost ex-wife, standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Elliott Bay in a tailored blazer, shaking hands with the governor of Washington. He stared at the photograph for a very long time. Then he called Vanessa. "I think Claire was lying to me," he said. "Our entire marriage. About what?" "About everything." When Derek arrived at Montgomery Capital the following afternoon, without an appointment, the receptionist, a young woman with excellent posture and absolutely no urgency, asked for his name, his purpose, and whether he had a scheduled meeting. He did not. She made him wait 47 minutes in the lobby. He counted them. When I finally came down, I was wearing a charcoal blazer and the particular kind of calm that comes not from the absence of feeling, but from having processed your feelings in advance and decided what to do with them. Derek stood up when he saw me. He looked like a man who had rehearsed something and forgotten all of it. "You lied to me," he said. "I kept a secret," I said. "There's a difference. We were married for 8 years, Claire. We were. And for 7 of those years, you never once asked me about my family, my background, or where I came from. Not seriously, not in a way that suggested the answer mattered to you." I gestured toward the seating area. "Would you like to sit down?" "I don't want to sit down." He ran a hand through his hair. "If I had known who you were, you would have married me faster," I said, "and left me slower. But you still would have left. Because the problem was never my bank account, Derek. The problem was that you needed to be the most significant person in every room, and I was very good at making sure you were. The moment that stopped being useful to you, you found someone else." He stared at me. "That's not fair," he said. "Fair is an interesting word choice," I said, "from a man who handed his wife divorce papers on their anniversary and kept the sectional sofa." He opened his mouth, closed it, then quietly, "Did you ever actually love me? Or was it just an experiment? See if someone would love you without the money?" I looked at him for a long moment. "I loved you completely," I said. "That is the most expensive thing I've ever given anyone, and it is the one thing in this entire situation I do not regret. Because it was real." I picked up my phone from the reception desk where I had set it. "The experiment, as you call it, failed. Not because love requires money to be real, but because you needed more than I was willing to become. I was willing to be small for you, Derek. I was not willing to disappear." I walked to the elevator. "Claire, Thomas will be in touch about the settlement," I said. "Have a safe drive home." The elevator doors closed. Back on the executive floor, Maggie was waiting with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a woman who had heard everything through the lobby intercom and intended to maintain plausible deniability about it. "How did I look?" I asked. "Like a woman who has done her homework," Maggie said. "He looked like a man who hasn't studied for the exam and just realized it's today." "Good." I sat down. "How close are we to final parcel acquisition?" "Closing on parcels 5 and 6 on Friday." "And the senator?" Maggie smiled. It was not an entirely comfortable smile. "Senator Hartwell," she said, "has no idea that every access point to his $200 million development project is currently owned by a cat." Operation Honda completed the following Friday. All 6 parcels were recorded. Biscuit Holdings, LLC, wholly owned through a chain of shell entities that terminated at the Montgomery Family Trust, now controlled every utility easement, every pedestrian corridor, and every commercial access point surrounding Riverside Commons. Senator Harrison Hartwell's flagship development project was, as Thomas put it, with considerable professional satisfaction, landlocked and essentially stranded. Maggie updated the whiteboard. Operation Honda, complete. We opened a bottle of wine. Colonel Biscuit was given an extra portion of his preferred salmon-based food, which he accepted with the dignity of a cat, who has always known his contributions were undervalued. I felt, for the first time since that anniversary dinner, something that resembled peace. It lasted 4 days. On Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office to find Thomas waiting outside my door with the expression he reserved for situations that required careful management. He handed me a printed article. It was from a national financial publication. The headline read, "Montgomery Capital. Billionaire, heiress, uses fortune for personal vendetta after bitter divorce." I read it standing in the corridor. The article was long, detailed, and structured with the precision of something that had been carefully assembled by someone with access to very specific information. It described, in accurate detail, the property acquisitions around Riverside Commons. It framed them as a retaliatory campaign driven by personal grievance. It quoted unnamed sources describing me as emotionally unstable, professionally reckless, and, the phrase that landed hardest, a woman using daddy's money as a weapon because her husband found someone better. It included my college graduation photograph. I had braces in it. "Focus, Claire," Maggie said from behind me. He used my college graduation photo. The article is the problem, not the photo. Although the photo choice does suggest a particular kind of petty that I find informative. Who gave them the information about the acquisitions? Thomas and Maggie exchanged a glance. "That's the second problem," Thomas said. By noon, 3 of Montgomery Capital's largest institutional investors had called to express concern. One used the phrase reputational liability. Another said the words hostile pattern of behavior. The third requested an emergency board meeting. This was the first catastrophe. The board meeting happened the following morning. 9 members, a conference table that had belonged to my father, and the particular tension of people who had grown accustomed to operating without oversight suddenly realizing the oversight had returned. 3 board members pushed for what Gerald Fitch, 71, old guard, former colleague of my father's, described as a temporary leadership transition, while a crisis communications team managed the fallout. "Your father built this company on discipline and discretion," Gerald said. He was not unkind. He was simply a man who had spent 50 years in finance and believed that optics were load-bearing walls. This situation looks like neither. I sat at the head of the table, my father's chair, still adjusted to his height, and felt the particular loneliness of a room full of people who are not precisely your enemies, but are not precisely your allies either. I excused myself. I stood in the corridor, outside the conference room, my back against the wall, and breathed. Thomas appeared beside me. He did not offer inspiration or strategy. He handed me a coffee and said, "Gerald Fitch cried at a shareholder meeting 4 years ago because the projector malfunctioned. I'm just saying." I laughed. It was short and insufficient and exactly what I needed. I went back in. I addressed the board directly. I presented the financial rationale for every acquisition, sound, documented, entirely defensible on business grounds. I acknowledged the optics problem without conceding the underlying strategy. I proposed a communications plan that Thomas had drafted that morning. By the time the meeting ended, the vote to maintain current leadership was 7-2. I had survived the board. I thought briefly that the worst was over. This was the second catastrophe beginning to prepare itself. 1 week later, Maggie called me into the conference room at 7 in the morning. On the table was a printed report. A junior analyst at Montgomery Capital named Kevin Marsh had been for the past 14 months sending documents to an external recipient. Acquisition targets, corporate structure files, the shell company architecture for Biscuit Holdings. Kevin Marsh was Senator Harrison Hartwell's godson. He had been placed inside Montgomery Capital before I even returned to Seattle as a contingency. The senator had anticipated me. I stood at the conference table, looking at the org chart with Kevin's name on it, and felt something cold move through my chest. 14 months, I said. He was hired on a standard analyst contract through a staffing firm, Maggie said. Her voice was carefully controlled. Background check was clean. References were real. The connection to Hartwell is through the godfather relationship, which is not a searchable data point. He knew I'd come back eventually, apparently. I looked at the report. The property acquisition documents Kevin had forwarded had been used to build the hit piece, and now Hartwell's legal team, armed with that information, had filed for an injunction claiming predatory business practices, legally thin but sufficient to freeze 3 of the 6 property acquisitions pending a court hearing. Operation Honda was partially frozen. The senator had not been sitting still. I sat down in my father's chair that evening after everyone else had gone home. The office was quiet. The city lights spread out below the window. I picked up my father's old fountain pen from its stand on the desk. I spoke out loud to no one, or perhaps to him. I made this personal when it should have stayed strategic, I said. And now it's both, and I'm not sure I'm ready for both. The silence held. You'd probably tell me I should have kept better tabs on HR. The fountain pen was cool and heavy in my hand. My father had used it to sign every major deal he had ever made. He had given it to me the year I turned 20, along with a piece of advice I had not fully understood until that moment. He had said, "The most dangerous thing you can do in business is underestimate how much someone is paying attention. The second most dangerous thing is underestimating yourself." I set the pen down carefully. Then I picked up my phone and called Thomas. "I need everything," I said. "Every financial record, every public filing, every transaction Senator Harrison Hartwell has made in the last 10 years. I don't care what it costs or how long it takes. Everything." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Any particular reason?" he said. "Because a man who plants a spy in his adversary's company 14 months in advance is a man who has a great deal to protect," I said. "And a man with that much to protect usually has something worth finding." Thomas and a team of forensic accountants spent 11 days. What they found took my breath away. Senator Harrison Hartwell had been, for 6 years, routing federal infrastructure grant money allocated by his Committee for Public Transportation Improvements in Washington state, through a series of shell companies, and ultimately into the private financing for Riverside Commons. $73 million. Not his money, not investment capital, taxpayer funds designated for public infrastructure redirected into his personal development project through a financial structure sophisticated enough that it had survived multiple audits. Thomas laid the documents on my desk. "This man defrauded the taxpayers of Washington State," he said. "How much?" I asked, though I already knew. $73 million over 6 years. I looked at the documents for a long moment. "He's not just an arrogant man protecting his daughter's relationship," I said. "He's a criminal. A well-protected one, but yes." I thought about the hit piece, the planted analyst, the injunction filed to slow my acquisitions. Everything Hartwell had done over the past weeks had been designed to discredit me, delay me, exhaust me. He had been protecting something much larger than his development project. "Who do we call?" Maggie said from the doorway. "The FBI field office," I said. "No, Seattle division. We hand them everything, and we let them do their jobs." Thomas nodded. "And the injunction?" "When the federal investigation opens, his legal team will have considerably larger problems than our property acquisitions." I closed the document folder. "The injunction will collapse on its own," Maggie wrote on the whiteboard. She crossed out Operation Honda. Below it, she wrote, "Operation Full Send." Thomas stared at it. "That is not a professional name for a strategy." "Neither is Biscuit Holdings," Maggie said. "But we won a federal fraud case with it, so." The FBI referral was made on a Wednesday. The investigation opened quietly. These things always do at first. But Thomas's contacts in the federal legal community confirmed within 48 hours that the documentation was substantive enough to trigger a full evidentiary review. The injunction against the property acquisitions was challenged in court using the fraud documentation as counter-evidence. The judge reviewed the filings, recognized the conflict, and dissolved the injunction within 2 weeks. All 6 parcels were fully operational again. Derek, working on due diligence for a Hartwell deal, noticed the injunction dissolution and called me. "I didn't know," he said immediately, "about the fraud, what Hartwell was doing with the grant money. I swear I didn't know, Claire." "I believe you," I said. "That's..." A pause. "That's actually the saddest part," he said. He sounded like a man who was beginning to understand the shape of the situation he had placed himself in. "You're right," I said quietly. "It is." The Robert Montgomery Foundation announcement was scheduled for a Thursday evening gala at the Westin, 12 weeks after I had returned to Seattle. $300 million in initial endowment. Programs for grief support, financial literacy for women navigating divorce, and economic justice resources for anyone who had been systematically undervalued by the institutions and people who should have protected them. It was, in many ways, the clearest expression of everything I had learned in the past 8 years. My father had built his empire to create something lasting. I was going to use it to help people the way I had needed to be helped. In the rental house in Portland, clipping coupons in a clearance dress, long before I allowed myself to remember who I actually was. 2 hours before the gala, my phone rang. It was Maggie. Her voice was careful in the way that preceded very bad news. "You need to sit down," she said. "Tell me. A tabloid posted a story 40 minutes ago. It's..." A pause. "Claire, Derek gave them your diary entries." I sat very still. During the 3rd year of our marriage, I had kept a journal. Not regularly. I was never a disciplined diarist. But during the anniversary of my father's death each year, I would write private entries about grief, about missing him, about the loneliness of carrying something large that no one around you can see or understand, about the specific ache of succeeding at something your father can no longer witness. I had shown Derek one entry once In a moment of trusting him with something real, he had apparently kept it. The tabloid story included photographs of handwritten pages, my handwriting, my words about my father, about grief, about the year after his death when I had felt so profoundly lost that I had built an entirely new identity just to survive the feeling. The headline called me, "The Billionaire's Secret Breakdown." I read it in the car on the way to the gala. Thomas and Maggie were both in the car with me. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. "He kept them," I said finally. My voice was very quiet. "For 8 years, he kept them. Not the business documents, not the financial information, the grief, the private, fragile, handwritten record of missing my father, weaponized, published, displayed for the entertainment of strangers." "Claire," Thomas began. "I'm going to the gala," I said. "Maybe we should postpone." "I'm going." The car was quiet. Then Maggie said, very carefully, "What do you need?" I thought about my father's fountain pen, cool and heavy on the desk. "I need to stop letting the people who hurt me write the first draft of my story," I said. "That's what I need." The Weston Ballroom was full when I arrived. The tabloid story had been running for 2 hours, and the room knew it. I could feel it. The particular charge of a crowd that has absorbed a piece of information and is waiting to see how the subject responds. Vanessa Hartwell was there, near the center of the room, wearing a gown that cost more than most monthly salaries, and the expression of a woman who believes she has won something. Derek was near the back. He had come, which I had not expected. He looked like a man who could not stop watching the thing he had set in motion. I walked to the stage. The room fell quiet. I looked out at all of them, the board members and the investors, the journalists and the philanthropists, Vanessa in her expensive gown, and Derek in the back row, and I made a decision. I did not give the prepared speech. "Many of you read something about me tonight," I said. My voice was steady and clear, and did not perform anything. Private words I wrote when I was 24 years old, grieving my father, trying to figure out who I was without him. Those words were shared by someone I trusted. He chose to use them tonight because he ran out of better weapons. The room was absolutely silent. Everything I wrote was true. I was lost. I was frightened. I was a young woman who had just lost the most important person in her life and did not know how to carry what he had left behind. I am not ashamed of that. Grief is not weakness. Confusion is not failure. Being genuinely, messily human is not a character flaw. I paused. What I am ashamed of is that I spent 8 years making myself invisible to protect someone else's ego. Staying small so that someone else could feel large. Hiding what I was so that someone who could not handle it would not have to face his own limitations. I looked out at the room. That ends tonight. Somewhere near the back, I heard Derek exhale. My father built this company because he believed that real power is built by creating things that outlast you, not by acquiring things, not by defeating rivals, by building something that serves people who need it, long after you are gone. I opened the folder on the podium. Tonight I am announcing the Robert Montgomery Foundation. $300 million, beginning immediately, supporting grief counseling, financial literacy for women navigating divorce and economic instability, and justice resources for anyone who has been told they are not worth fighting for. I looked up. Because I spent 8 years being told, in 100 small and quiet ways, that I was not worth fighting for. And I want to make sure the next woman who hears that message has somewhere to turn. The applause started slowly and built until it filled the room completely. Vanessa left early. I noted this without particular satisfaction. Senator Hartwell standing near the back. He had come to watch me fail. stood very still, and I could see him recalculating. It was too late. After the speech, I found Derek in the corridor. He looked diminished somehow. Not physically. He was the same person he had always been, but the particular confidence that had always animated him was absent, replaced by something quieter and less comfortable. "I don't know why I did it," he said. "I do," I said. "You needed me to be less than you. It was the one thing you had always needed from me, and I kept providing it. And when I stopped, you looked for another way to make it happen." I studied him. The diary entries were the last version of that. Make me look broken, make me look like the wrong woman after all. "I'm sorry. I know you are." I meant it. There was no anger in it, just the clean acknowledgement of a fact. Here is something I have learned, Derek, that I want you to actually hear. Forgiving someone who hurt you is not about them. It is about refusing to carry them any further. You have already cost me years of energy and sleep and the specific grief of being loved insufficiently. At some point, you are allowed to set the bag down. I looked at him steadily. "I'm setting the bag down." He nodded. His eyes were bright in a way that might have been tears, which would have been the most honest thing I had ever seen from him. "Go home," I said. "Build something real." I genuinely mean that. I walked back into the ballroom. Senator Harrison Hartwell was indicted on 14 counts of federal fraud 6 weeks after the FBI referral. The indictment described, in precise and unsparing legal language, 6 years of grant fund misappropriation, $73 million redirected from public infrastructure into private development, and a pattern of financial manipulation sophisticated enough to constitute organized federal crime. The senator's press conference was brief and unconvincing. His legal team was expensive and eventually insufficient. Hartwell and Associates shuttered within 30 days of the indictment. The Riverside Commons project was frozen pending asset seizure. Derek, who had been carefully excluded from every financial structure that touched the fraud, because he genuinely had not known, which was both true and the saddest version of the truth, was quietly let go when there was nothing left to be let go from. He landed, eventually, at a small, non-profit legal practice in Tacoma that provided free representation to low-income families in housing disputes. Maggie told me this one morning, over coffee, "He's working for a non-profit," she said. There was a pause. Good for him, honestly. I considered the statement. "Yeah," I said. "Good for him." And I meant it, which surprised me slightly. The Robert Montgomery Foundation launched formally 2 weeks after the gala. The first grants went to 47 individuals, 31 women and 16 men navigating financial and personal recovery after divorce, job loss, or family crisis. A grief counseling clinic opened in partnership with a community health center. A financial literacy program began enrolling participants in Seattle, Tacoma, and Portland. A woman named Patricia, 61 years old, recently divorced after 32 years, with no financial history in her own name because her husband had managed everything, received a foundation grant that covered 6 months of financial counseling and legal assistance. She called the foundation office to say thank you. I happened to answer the phone. "I thought I was too old to start over," she said. Her voice was careful, in the way of someone who has spent a long time being told their feelings were inconvenient. I thought I had missed my window. "You haven't," I said. "You made me believe that." "Your speech? I watched it on my phone in my car, in the parking lot of a grocery store, and I cried. Not sad crying, the other kind." I sat with that for a moment. "That's the whole point," I said. After I hung up, I sat in my father's office for a while, not working, just sitting. Colonel Biscuit was asleep on the windowsill, his tabby sides rising and falling in the late afternoon light. I thought about the 24-year-old who had written those diary entries, frightened and lost and hiding behind a borrowed name. I thought about the 32-year-old who had signed divorce papers and driven to Seattle and sat in her father's office and found, beneath the grief and the anger, something that was still entirely, stubbornly herself. There is a version of this story where I become only my revenge, where I spend the rest of my life using a $4 billion inheritance to systematically dismantle every person who underestimated me. It would be satisfying in the narrow, airless way that pure vengeance is satisfying, complete, final, and ultimately empty. The version I chose was harder and better. I chose to build something. 1 year after the gala, on a Saturday morning in early October, I was in my father's office, going through the last physical box from the Portland house. I had put it off for months, not from grief exactly, but from the low-grade reluctance of finishing something. The sense that closing a box means accepting that the chapter is genuinely over. I worked through it methodically. Old mail, a few books, some kitchen items I had been fond of, photographs from our early years together that I looked at without flinching and without particular emotion, which felt like progress. At the bottom of the box, tucked inside a copy of a novel I had given Derek for his birthday in our second year, was a folded piece of paper. Derek's handwriting. I unfolded it. It was dated year 2. We had been married 18 months. It read, "Whoever Claire was before I met her, whoever she becomes after me, she deserves someone who sees all of it and stays anyway. I hope she finds that. I hope I'm brave enough to be that." D. He had written it. He had kept it all those years, through the slow drift and the deliberate distance and the anniversary dinner and the manila envelope. He had known what she deserved. He had been unable to become it. I sat with the note for a long time, then I folded it carefully and put it back inside the book. I did not throw it away. It was part of the true account of things, and the true account deserved to be kept even when it was complicated. I closed the box. That evening, James Whitmore came over for dinner. We had been together for 7 months, with the particular unhurried quality of two people who have both learned the hard way what urgency in the wrong direction costs. He was steady in the way that some people are steady, not because nothing moves them, but because they have built a strong enough foundation that movement does not mean collapse. He made dinner while I told him about the note. He listened the way he always listened, completely without performing attention, just actually present. "How do you feel?" he said. "Sad for him," I said, "and glad for me, both at once. That's a mature reaction. I've had a lot of practice at complicated feelings." He smiled. He had a good smile, honest, without calculation. "The foundation got its first independent evaluation back today," I said. 1,214 people served in the first year, 3 clinics, 7 partner organizations across 3 states. I picked up my wine glass. Patricia, the woman who called to say thank you, she's training to become a financial counselor. She wants to work with the foundation. "That's the whole point," James said. "That's what I told her." After dinner, we sat on the small balcony of the Shelley apartment I had taken in Capitol Hill. Not my father's building, not the corporate address, but a place that was mine in a quieter way. And watched the city do what cities do in the evening, which is to glow and hum and continue regardless. "Do you regret any of it?" James asked. I thought about the clearance dress, the anniversary dinner, the corridor at the charity gala where I had stood alone with my champagne glass and felt the gut punch of watching Derek inhabit the life he had chosen. I thought about the board meeting and Kevin's name on the org chart and my father's fountain pen cool in my hand in the empty office. I thought about standing on the stage at the Westin, speaking without notes, and feeling the room shift. I regret the years I spent being smaller than I was, I said. That's a real loss. 8 years of choosing someone else's comfort over my own honesty. I paused. But the rest of it, the fight, the foundation, learning what I was actually capable of. No, not even the hard parts. Your father would be proud. I think so. I leaned back. He always said that real power isn't about defeating enemies. It's about creating something that outlasts all of them. I looked out at the city. I'm finally beginning to understand what he meant. The night was clear. Somewhere across the city, Senator Hartwell was in the early weeks of a 6-year federal sentence. Derek was in Tacoma, doing quiet, useful work that would not make him famous, possibly making him someone he could be proud of. Vanessa had moved to San Francisco and seemed, from the limited social media evidence, to be building a quieter and more honest version of her life. Everyone was carrying their choices forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. Colonel Biscuit knocked your Forbes magazine off the desk, sat on it, and is now refusing to move. I believe he's making a statement, I showed James. He laughed. He has excellent editorial instincts, James said. He always did. I typed it back. Tell him I appreciate the commentary. Leave the magazine, Maggie replied. Already done. Also, the Foundation Board approved the expanded parental support program. 43 applicants in the first week. I set the phone down. The expanded program had been James's suggestion, actually. Or rather, it had emerged from a conversation we'd had about the gaps between what the Foundation offered and what people actually needed. Not just women, not just divorce, parents trying to stay present in their children's lives after the structures of their families had collapsed. People trying to do better than they had done, in situations that made doing better very difficult. It was the right expansion. I thought about Derek, somewhere in Tacoma, working for people who needed him. I thought about Patricia, training to become what she had needed someone to be for her. I thought about the 24-year-old with the fountain pen and the grief and the borrowed name, driving to Portland in the rain, thinking she needed to disappear to find out who she was. She had found out. It had cost her 8 years and an anniversary dinner and a tabloid story and several catastrophes. And she had found out completely. Here is what I know now, sitting on a balcony with a good man and a city full of lights, 1 year removed from the worst dinner of my life. The people who underestimate you are not your enemies. They are your evidence. Every person who looked at you and saw something smaller than what you actually were, they were giving you information, not about your limitations, about theirs. You do not have to prove them wrong. You only have to keep building. The woman who signed those divorce papers thought she was losing everything. She was wrong. She was losing, finally, the weight of a life that had never been fully hers. And what she built in its place, the foundation, the company, the honest love, the room she stopped apologizing for taking up, was worth more than anything she had ever been asked to give away. Derek had called her the wrong woman. He was right in the end, just not in the way he meant. She was entirely the wrong woman for the small life he had planned. She was exactly the right woman for everything that came after. James refilled my wine glass without being asked. Colonel Biscuit, according to a follow-up text from Maggie, had relocated from the Forbes magazine to the center of the conference table, where he was apparently holding the room hostage. The foundation would open a new office in Portland in the spring. The company had just closed its largest acquisition in 3 years, And the woman who had once bought a dress on clearance because her husband said they needed to watch the budget was sitting on her own balcony in a city she loved, surrounded by people who had never once asked her to make herself smaller. She was not invisible. She had never been invisible. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to let everyone else catch up. Closing editorial disclaimer. The content you have just experienced was carefully researched, thoughtfully constructed, and manually edited by our team with one purpose in mind: to deliver stories that carry genuine meaning and leave you with something worth keeping. Every character, every scene, and every lesson was crafted by hand to ensure the highest quality experience for you, our audience. This is not generated content. This is storytelling built with intention, because we believe you deserve nothing less.